It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and something weird's happening with the wormhole. It keeps making itself known without any apparent arrivals or departures, which is obviously a cause for concern among those who believe gods live in it. We'll have to leave it there, though, as Sisko's received a call from Starfleet. It's serious enough to warrant an informal meeting in Ops. Some proper bad shit's gone down on Earth, specifically the bombing of a conference between the Federation and the Romulans. That's bad enough, but the recording of the incident has something distinctly changeling in it, and that means Founder infiltration has reached the heart of the Federation. This means a trip back home for Sisko, so it's an opportunity to see his dad. Joseph Sisko's running a restaurant in New Orleans, despite his questionable health, and expects his son and grandson to be staying with him. Jake's not delighted by that idea, as it'll mean he gets roped into working at the restaurant, but perhaps being around diners will give him an idea for a story or something. The news has some of our people a bit shaken. It's even enough to put Bashir and O'Brien off their holosuite fun, and for the latter to ask Odo to check in on his family while on Earth, Starfleet having requested our resident changeling to accompany Sisko. Odo's not sure his face would be a welcome one to O'Brien's family under the circumstances, but says he'll try and find the time anyway. At least the wormhole stopped doing whatever it was doing before they leave, and Kira's a little disappointed, hoping it was a sign of the prophets coming to say hi, but Worf has little time for such things. The Klingons don't have gods, you see. They used to, but his ancestors got pissed off with their bullshit and murderized them, a distinctly Klingon answer to the question of theology. To Starfleet Command we go, and an admiral called Leyton is known to Sisko as he used to be the first officer of a ship Leyton captained. He's assisted by Commander Benteen, and the two of them welcome Sisko and Odo to Earth. With that out of the way, we get to the real reason they were invited. Sisko and Odo might be the people best suited to provide information on the Founders and Dominion, but those questions could have been asked at a distance. No, Sisko's here for something else. To take over the entirety of Starfleet security and protect it from changelings. Joseph Sisko's establishment has some curious decorations, but he's clearly doing something right given the number of diners he has. 2 more arrive in the shape of his son and grandson. Odo decided it would be best to stay at Starfleet Command given the current mood. Joe insists they eat, though declines to do so himself with an excuse, giving Sisko a reason to comment on his health. Joe waves it away and says he's fine, then changes the topic to the recent bombing. He need not have bothered, as Eggnog changes the topic again by turning up at the restaurant. It's not the first time either, it seems, as he has a standing order with Joe for live bugs, something that makes Sisko reconsider eating his own meal. Later, after Joe's bid farewell to other customers and gone for a drink with his son, Jake pulls Eggnog aside. He thinks Eggnog stayed late for a chance to talk, and he's right. The academy is not all he expected. It's school and hard work, but that's not what he means. What he means is that some of the cadets are elitist wankers, and it's not just to him. There's something called Red Squad consisting of the top achievers, a group that gets special attention and training, and they don't even acknowledge new cadets. Jake suggests giving it some time as it's all still new, and that seems to help. Speaking of help, Sisko and Admiral Leyton are visiting the President of the Federation to present him with some security advice. He's not sure such serious suggestions are necessary. In fact, he thinks the whole Founder threat is overblown. Sisko's suitcase becoming Odo is a pretty strong counterpoint, and Odo pointing out the failures of his own security on the way in is just the cherry. The President still doesn't like it, but agrees to security measures for Starfleet installations and blood checks on officials and their families. Part of those security measures involve pooping yellow over rooms. It's essentially the same thing we saw earlier in the season when checking for Odo on DS9, and he's volunteered to be the guinea pig once more to see what's effective. Off Benteen goes to install them all over their headquarters after thanking Sisko, but not Odo, for his help. And speaking of help yet again, Eggnog turns up for a chat with Sisko. He's taken Jake's advice on board and thinks the solution to being ignored by this Red Squad is to try and join them. That requires the recommendation of an officer though, and as Sisko sponsored him for the academy, he's already on the hook for Eggnog fucking up. At this point, Eggnog thinks he might as well double his bet, and Sisko reluctantly agrees. It's been a busy time for him, which means he's not had a chance to visit his dad that much. Neither has Jake, it seems, as he's had the good sense to go and take a look at the writing school he turned down while he's back here on Earth. Cisco has had the chance to check with Joe's doctor, though, and discovers he's not been for treatment in 8 months. Joe's still not in the mood to discuss it, and Cisco chooses not to push things, so they go for a walk and a chat instead. Odo's having a chat too, once he finishes being a seagull. Bentine's interested, but Admiral Leyton's a bit abrupt when talking to Odo, to the point of rudeness, in fact, and he tries to leave with Bentine. Odo's not done with him yet, though, and tries to thank the Admiral for trusting him with a handshake, one that is declined. Odo presses the matter and grabs Leyton's hand, then starts to morph, with the shapeshifter pretending to be Admiral Leyton. The imposter compliments Odo and pushes him away, then turns into a seagull himself and scarpers. The real Admiral Leyton is asking Odo how he knew he was talking to an imposter. Odo says there was a feeling of hostility, which is understandable when Odo's the first changeling to make another of his kind do it dead, assuming the founders are telling the truth, that is. Regardless, the imposter managed to get in and out without triggering any of the new procedures we've installed. Leyton thinks that's because they weren't allowed to be more strict and says the Federation's current president isn't up to making difficult choices. That'll all have to wait, though, as Cisco gets a call from his son. Joe has been arrested. He arrives to find some Starfleet officers apologizing. They're here to run blood tests, and Joe's not impressed to find the idea came from his own son. It's a fair argument, really. Cisco's the one who signed up to Starfleet, not Joe or Jake. Expecting them to follow orders strikes Joe as wrong, and Jake complying does nothing to convince him. It's not necessary in the end, as Joe cuts himself chopping food, and is dismayed to see that his son had genuinely suspected him for a moment. Joe points out that the test is pointless anyway, as a changeling could just nick somebody's blood and spit it out on command, making the whole exercise irrelevant. Then he has a bit of a wobble and falls over. He's fine, apparently, a mild stroke, as Cisco tells Odo later, but it's got he and Jake upset. That's not helped by Cisco's genuine suspicion of his father, something Odo points out was the whole intention of his people being here. It's also not helped by the worry that Joe's right, and all of these precautions won't make a difference. As for Joe himself, he's still working, much to the frustration of Jake. He is taking it easier, though, as not even his ability to deny the state of his health can stop him from feeling like utter dogshit. His desire to keep the restaurant running is admirable, if ill-fated. There's not a lot he can do when all of the lights go out. It's not just New Orleans from the looks of things either, as Starfleet Command, based in San Francisco, is having similar issues. Admiral Leyton says the entirety of Earth's power supply has gone offline, and he assumes founder shenanigans. If an enemy wanted to leave Earth utterly open to attack, and cutting power to everything on the planet is a pretty good choice. The President of the Federation is in full-on pant-shitting mode, and it's not helped when Cisco, Odo and Leyton teleport in by using a ship in orbit. Cisco telling him he has to declare a planetary emergency probably doesn't improve his mood either, and nor does the possibility of a Jem'Hadar fleet. Cisco's had time to think about the misfiring wormhole from the start of the episode, and how a whole lot of cloaked ships got kaboomed around the Founder's homeworld last season. And perhaps the wormhole wasn't misfiring after all, and we just couldn't see what was coming out. All of which means it could be vital that we get boots on the ground now, assuming such a fleet doesn't just sit in orbit and nuke the shit out of us, that is. Getting the power back up could take days, but by a handy coincidence, Leyton tells the President that preparations have been made for just such an emergency. They can use ships in orbit as hubs for communications and teleporting, and Starfleet personnel here on Earth can be armed using the massive stockpile of weapons that we have lying around just in case. The alternative is just sitting here with our thumbs up our asses, so the President hands over control of the planet to Cisco and Leyton. Which is why, shortly thereafter, Jake tells his granddad to wake up and take a look at what's happening outside. Armed troops are teleporting into the street, but we'll have to wait and see how that turns out, as we're told the story is to be continued. To Earth, then, and a whole heap of bad shit, but some important things to consider as well. We get our first look at Cisco's dear old dad for a start, which is quite the glow-up for somebody we'd implied was dead a few seasons back. We'd been prepared for it, of course, with mentions made of Cisco's dad most recently in the second episode of this season, so it's not entirely out of the blue. Nor is it particularly out of the blue thematically, either. We've had a few episodes of late that focused on the relationship between Cisco and Jake, ones that I'd argue did a good job of making him more than just a generic hero, so expanding on that familial aspect makes a lot of sense. It's a good choice narratively too. After giving Cisco sweeping power as the acting head of Starfleet security, we've also paired that with a character that he can't order around. Joe's a sometimes crotchety old bastard who won't take his medicine, and there's bugger all Cisco can do about it, save badger him now and then before letting it go. Seeing Cisco struggle to influence somebody he cares about the most but can directly control the least serves to make him more real. A good character must be defined by their limitations as well as their strengths. Without kryptonite, Superman has nothing to lose. To the main plot then, and confirmation of changeling infiltration on Earth. The Founders are here, or at least one of them is, and now we have to deal with the problems that entails. How do you secure facilities against such an enemy? Shy of making all critical infrastructure entirely isolated, fully airtight with no changeover of staff, you're a bit buggered. And that's assuming changelings can't become pure energy and enter via power or communications lines, or as a beam of light through a window for that matter. We still don't have a definitive answer on the limitations of shapeshifting. And that's the point, really, isn't it? Mystery is harder to fight than a fact. As the Romulans would say, if knowledge is power, then to be unknown is to be unconquerable. It's been implied that the Founders have used the more absolute implementation of this approach with other species, to the point that even many Jem'Hadar have never actually seen one. They've not taken the same zero-contact route with us, which is an indication, perhaps, of just how much of a threat they consider us, but they've still tried to maintain as much mystery as possible. Even the impersonation of Admiral Leyton, a target you could argue was unnecessarily high-profile, serves a purpose. A minute's work by the copy served to demoralize all those who've tried to prevent infiltration by proving it's largely pointless. Providing just enough of a demonstration to cause fear means the Federation wastes its time and energy chasing shadows, or secures something to the point of it working at only a fraction of its potential, if at all. All of this from a single changeling. Or, to be more accurate, all of this from the imaginations of those seeking to protect themselves against a single changeling. A couple of bits to touch on before we sign off today then. Let's start by looking at Dax fucking with Odo's stuff. Now, I can think of a couple of different ways to view this, depending on your generosity. The first is that Dax is being a proper arsehole. Openly working against Odo's expressed desire for order in his own environment, an environment that he was only recently granted, remember, can be deeply upsetting to someone who finds it easier to concentrate or relax when things are organized to their needs. Cocking about with that isn't just a fun jape, it's an attack on a person's mental health. The second, which I think is more in keeping with the character of Dax, is that there's more to this. She wouldn't take time out of her day just to dick with Odo. She would, however, take time out of her day to ensure that somebody she likes, somebody who's perhaps not liked by many people and outright feared by others after recent events, still knew that he was as accepted by her as he ever was. And she might do it in such a way that the recipient could choose to feign irritation if he chose, something you might see from a person who struggles to express their emotions, for example. That second explanation might sound overly generous to you, and you may have a point, but I'd like to believe our future involves a greater level of consideration for those whose brains work differently. Lastly, we have a tiny snippet from Bashir. When O'Brien asks Odo to check in on his family, Odo offers the same to Bashir. Bashir, however, categorically does not have anybody on Earth that he wants to check on, and swiftly changes the topic. We won't learn for a while quite what prompted Bashir to an emphatic no, and I think it unlikely that whoever wrote that line knew where it was going, but I'll give some points to whoever it was anyway. Sometimes good planning is just giving yourself enough options to make something up later. End of episode.
I can't believe it's come to this.
Don't you dare start whining. This is your bloody fault. We had all plot lined up to carry us over to season 5 and you went and buggered it up.
I know, and I'm sorry, but this? Are we really reduced to a holosuite story?
It's the best he could come up with at short notice. That Ordinator plotline had spaceship chases and bar fights and no end of stuff. You've no idea how much of the budget he blew on hiring goats. It were gonna be a masterpiece. Now that's all gone pear-shaped thanks to you, so we gotta make do.
This is so embarrassing.
Suck it up, cheese bag. This is what we've got.
Okay, fine. I can do this. As long as it's not Flotter and Trevis, we can make it work.
Computer.
Yes?
Not you, bellend.
Oh, sorry.
Computer, begin program.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Woof.